Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 4th of October now, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that many different ways. The easiest one's probably going online, weather.gov/Alaska, or picking up the phone and calling the Alaska Weather Information Line at 1-800-472-0391. It's been a while since I said that. You can always email us if you have questions about the website, questions about the Alaska Weather Information Line, or just want to send us a picture of what it looks like from your back deck. Please do that. nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov is the place to reach all of the Alaska Weather TV team. Of course, we're always on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. And you can find this broadcast a little bit later on into the evening. Now here's where you can find our shows, of course, on the ARC system. 530 is where we are and where we have been for a very long time. Pleased to say that KUAC, starting this Sunday, will start showing Alaska weather on the 530 slot there on KUAC 9.4. That's a UAF TV channel there. So it hasn't been on Sunday previously. It's about to be 7 days a week. So make sure you let the folks at KUAC know that you appreciate that service there on UAF TV. 360 North. I'm sorry, that'd be 360 North where that's happening. 730. Boy, it's a little rusty on the edges there. 530 KUAC. It's there 9.4. 360 North is where it's going to be on Sunday nights at 7:30 now. 7 days a week. So again, let KUAC know you appreciate that, but certainly let the folks at 360 North know that you appreciate that Sunday night service of the Alaska Weather Show now 7 days a week. Sundays, 7:30 is the new show time there, and of course the rest of the week there as well. Alaska Public Media now showing at 5 o'clock the following morning. Here's a look at the satellite picture now. A couple things to notice. All the activity is out here in the west over the Bering Sea. We have several waves of low pressure lining up, a very large area of quiet weather across southeast, the Gulf of Alaska, and the interior. The eastern Beaufort Sea coast, as well as the central coast, getting a little more activity, but certainly not what we're going to see out here in the Bering in the coming days. We have several waves of low pressure. We'll put this in motion here, and you can see one of those waves working northward toward the eastern coast of Russia. We've got another wave building in across the western chain, and there's another one back behind that. So really active weather here under a broad area of low pressure in the upper atmosphere. Across the southern part of southeast, a few showers have been lurking there around the Misty Fjords, Hyder, up towards Stewart. Otherwise, really dry conditions for just about all parts of the interior and south central. Out towards southwest, we start to see a few showers there across the southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula today, and across the central and western chain. There has been a few areas of wetter weather, some snowflakes and fog up across the Beaufort Sea coast. But once again, by and large, things are really dry and really quiet for most of the interior, the north, southeast, and south central. Even the west coast really hasn't seen a whole lot of wet weather, even though that broad area of low pressure has been working up from south to north. Now, as this progression continues to move eastward, it really looks like this high pressure ridge is going to try as hard as it can to hang on. That means the worst of the winds and the worst of the wet weather probably going to be out here across the central chain all the way up through the Pribilofs and into the northern Bering. As we head into tonight, gales have been increased to storm warnings there for the central Aleutian region as well as the southern Berings. No high wind warnings for any land areas at this point. But you can expect those winds to come up from the south as we go ahead in time, starting tonight and into tomorrow there for the central Aleutians. Here's a look at the surface weather chart. Again, really quiet conditions. Here's some light rain across the misty fjords, a trough of low pressure across the eastern Gulf, high pressure up across northwestern Alaska at 1,023 millibars, and just a few areas of snow showers or maybe just light flurries and fog. Not a whole lot to report home about. Low pressure out across the central Bering has several circulations out here. This seems to be the main one at 990 millibars. A little bit further west shows that 972 millibar low south and west of Attu, where rain was reported earlier today. Also had some light rain around Sand Point and westward there on the south side of the peninsula. Notice all the dry air here out across the central and western part of the interior, and then we get back into the clouds and the unsettled weather out across the west. Putting this into motion for tonight, high pressure in that ridge kind of works its way westward actually, keeps things really dry and stable across the interior and southeast. Still some pockets of showers across the misty fjords and maybe the Clarence Strait. Most of that again really limited. So the action is all out here. We lose our first wave of low pressure. It's absorbed or kind of spread out, I guess, into more of a broader area of low pressure working up toward the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island and Nunavak Island. This is going to weaken, while this one starts to take center stage at 967 millibars. So we've got storm warnings out for the central chain. Still pretty dry conditions for the interior tomorrow. Snow showers across the Beaufort Seacoast with that weak wave of low pressure trying to cut in on high pressure for the northern Yukon. But the action is still out west with low pressure across the central and western chain. East of Kiska, not quite to Adak yet. A 971 millibar low is pushing an inclusion into the Bering Sea. So there will be some stronger southerly winds as this front moves through. But notice it's working a little bit further north than it is west to east. It is kind of spreading out. So as it spreads out more, it's going to lose some of that more intense power. High pressure sitting out across the western Gulf at 1,020 millibars, and we still have some showers, more clouds than anything else out across southeast as we go into your Wednesday. Let's take a look at Thursday. Here's that front now, and that low pressure system just jumps further north and west, 977 millibars. The front spreads out. We still have a very deep southerly flow working up the west coast, but notice that clouds and the cloud cover and the moisture doesn't really zoom eastward at all. It's still trying to travel northward, and we're running into that drier and more stable regime of high pressure all the way from the Arctic all the way into the Gulf of Alaska. Out across the west, though, you can see some showers working through the central chain. A brief break with a high pressure ridge here. And just on the edge of your screen, you might not be able to see it, a 954 millibar low there that is going to work eastward as we head into Thursday night and Friday. So that's the one we're going to watch toward the end of the week that could bring in stronger winds, especially for the western Aleutians, maybe for the central Aleutians, and after that, we'll let you know. Out across the Gulf of Alaska, some pockets of rainfall there. Southeast, look at this, drier weather for you, even fewer clouds as we get into Thursday. Low pressure south and west of Haida Gwaii at 1,005 millibars, but by and large, high pressure across the mainland, western Canada and the Gulf of Alaska. Things look pretty quiet for most places as we get toward the end of the week, if you're not out in the Bering Sea or the North Pacific. That's a totally different story. So keep your eyes on the weather if you're in the Pribilofs, if you're in the Aleutians, all the way out toward Shemya, Attu, and the Alaska Peninsula. Yeah, keep your eye on what's going on, especially as we head into Thursday and Friday. Here's a look at temperatures today. Low to mid 50s for many in southeast. Not a bad day at all. 54 around the capital city and Sitka down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Stewart and Hyder in the low 50s, even with some light rain today. Yakutat was 52. Prince William Sound saw temperatures back in the mid 50s today. It was a cooler day in Anchorage. Some clouds and a little bit of drizzle from time to time. 48 degrees there. 51 in Homer, 52 in Talkeetna. You go up through the mountains and into Healy. It was 38 degrees. 38 in Fort Greely. 37 around Fairbanks at 2 o'clock. 33 in Eagle, and low 40s for Northway today with Gulkana and Glen Allen, and just about 50 degrees late this afternoon. Around Fort Yukon, we saw temps around 36 degrees, 29 in Arctic Village, and 20s and 30s for the North Slope. You got into the coastal plain just a little bit more, mid to upper 30s there. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse was holding around 30 degrees, 37 in Barrow and Kaktovik. 39 around Wainwright, lower to mid 40s for the Kotzebue Sound region, 44 in Nome, 46 in Unalakleet. About the same there in McGrath today. Galena saw 42. Bethel was 42 degrees. Gamble, St. Lawrence Island, 46. And as you head down into Bristol Bay, we saw temps in the upper 40s to lower 50s. Lake Iliamna, if you were flying through there today, you saw temps closer to 50 degrees. 50 in St. Paul, just a bit cooler in St. George. Low 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and Sandpoint showing 50 degrees. Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, our friends there showing 53, 52 in Atka, while it was 48 in Adak and 45 out on Attu. Now, as we look at overnight low temperatures, under high pressure and a clear sky, light winds, you know how that works out. It gets cold. Teens and 20s for many locations across the central and the eastern interior. Eagle, one of the colder spots at 12. Lower 30s for south central. Kodiak Island, you're looking at temps close to maybe just a hair below 40s. Southeast in the upper 30s and low 40s. Southwest, low 40s for the peninsula. And the chain probably closer to 50. The Pribilovs in the upper 40s tonight. Southwest, upper 30s to mid 40s. Nome about 37. And close to, but likely below, that freezing point for the North Slope tonight. Now tomorrow, high temperatures will warm into the upper 30s there. And for the upper Yukon Valley, probably mid-30s, closer to 40 in Fairbanks, closer to 50 for South Central and the Cook Inlet region, as well as the Kenai Peninsula. 52 in Kodiak Southeast, lower to mid-50s for many locations, although some spots could hold in the 40s, like, let's say, Petersburg. Lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula and the Bristol Bay region. About Adak and Atka, probably 53 degrees, 51 in St. Paul. And the YK Delta, you're looking at upper 40s to low 50s with Nome at 46 for your Wednesday. On to flying weather, we expect IFR to be widespread across the North Slope in the morning, including areas all the way up toward the Brooks Range, and it may linger there throughout the day. Out west, of course, we've got IFR spreading in along that next wave of low pressure, not the third wave, but this is just the second one coming in, and IFR expected to start the day in the Pribilovs. That may improve a little bit and refocus out to the west in the afternoon. That would, of course, include areas around Kiska all the way out toward Adak and Atka. IFR lifts northward a little bit more across the north coast, but if you're flying through some of the northern passes, you may still find that as you're working north or south out of those areas. Let's check. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we're going to say IFR through most of the day, but expect some improvements in the passes while you may not find that across the northern areas you're trying to reach. Adigan Pass, we expect similar conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see that start at MVFR, but we look for improvements as the day goes on. Rainy Pass, we expect to see VFR throughout the afternoon. Windy Pass should be pretty good most of the day. Better visibility and higher ceilings there in Isabel Pass at VFR. We expect VFR for Mentasta Pass throughout your day. Tanita Pass we expect to see. Visual flight rule throughout Wednesday, and for Portage Pass, things look pretty good as well. And for Chilkoot and White Pass, things look to be fairly tolerable there in southeastern Alaska, so enjoy that. Freezing levels indicate that we've got some colder air that's really centered around that high pressure ridge. Meanwhile, the levels are coming up out in the west as we see the atmosphere respond to that deep southerly flow. Out across the Gulf and southeast, levels as low as the surface to about 2,000 feet, and then up to about 6,000 feet around Haida Gwaii. 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels there from the central Yukon Valley all the way down toward Bristol Bay at about 6,000 feet. And the surface freezing line is north of the Bering Strait for now, but you can see it doesn't allow temperatures to be sub-freezing for the Beaufort Seacoast. Icing potential above 4 to about 6,000 feet across the northern Bering, and for the chain, anywhere from about 4 to 8,000 feet. Right now, we're only looking at light to isolated moderate across the west. No other places expected to see any widespread icing potential. When you look at the jet stream, it's no wonder we have a line of storms powering into the Bering. A very deep zone of low pressure across the North Pacific is guiding some very strong systems, including tropical systems heading in across the western Pacific and north into the central and western Aleutians. However, high pressure is still in charge across the northern interior and the Arctic coast, and that is really limiting how far east those systems are spreading. We'll see if this upper air pattern changes as we head toward the end of the week. But one thing that's guiding it right now is that deep southerly flow. And those winds at 9,000 feet are running around 50 to 60 knots or so across the Bering and the central and eastern Aleutians. High pressure is anchored across the western Gulf. And because of that, any systems that are moving through, or at least very close to the periphery of that control area from high pressure, they're pretty weak. And the winds around that are pretty weak as well. Only 10 knots or so working around the Yukon out across south central and southeast. You can see 15 knots coming in from the west across southeastern Alaska. So all in all, conditions across most areas inland and the interior are looking at very light, if not variable winds. As we get into 3,000 feet, a very similar pattern here, a stronger southerly flow. You can see wind speeds up to 45, even 60 knots there with low pressure just south of Kiska. The wind directions change just a little bit here across southeast and south central's coastlines. A little bit more of a south and easterly flow cutting over the southern part of Cook Inlet and Kodiak Island, 5 to 10 knots there. And we have our northwesterlies that pick up a little bit more from the Beaufort seacoast, about 15 to 20 knots on the north side of high pressure. This is at 3,000 feet. Here's a look at turbulence, and it should be no surprise that with 2, even 3 systems coming in, we're going to focus a lot of our attention for turbulence out across the Alaska Peninsula, the Pribilof, St. Matthew, St. Lawrence Island, and the Aleutians, generally below 4,000 feet. Do not be surprised to find isolated severe tomorrow across the central chain and out across the west. More likely to see widespread moderate across most of the Aleutians and into the Alaska Peninsula as we go throughout your day, and then spreading eastward as we head into Thursday. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather and an update on the sea ice edge in just a few minutes. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah. Right. We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt. Sure. So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
That sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going off.
Yep.
Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the north slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. It's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job. Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time. Here's a look at the sea ice across the North Slope. You can see some patchy low concentration ice north and east of Barrow, but it is growing there. We do have that confirmed from the Sea Ice Desk. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice will give you your latest forecast there, as well as a current analysis. You can check the concentrations and the thickness as it applies to you and where you may be going across the navigable waters there across the North Slope. As we look at the marine forecast in southeast, conditions are still looking rather tame. You're looking at northerlies coming out of the Lynn Canal around 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Elsewhere, 10 to 15 knots. North and northwesterly winds by and large. And outside of Yakutat and Icy Cape, a northeasterly flow. 10 knots with a 4-foot sea there on Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice winds starting to become more east to west oriented across the outer coast, 15 to 20 knots in those regions with 3 to 4-foot seas. The inside waters 10 to 20 knots generally from the north from Stevens Passage all the way up toward the Lynn Canal. Looking at 2 to 4-foot seas, and easterlies still cutting across the Clarence Strait region, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea on Thursday. Winds are light and variable as you would expect under high pressure across the north and western Gulf. That includes Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, all the way down to Shelikof Strait. Not too bad. Seas are small, 1 to 2 feet for Wednesday. Things start to change a little bit on Thursday. You can see the winds picking up to more of a north and easterly direction across outside of areas of Resurrection Bay, east and west sides of Kodiak Island and inside of Shelikof Strait. The winds are coming up to 20 knots with a 5-foot sea, and northeasterlies are developing in the southern half of Cook Inlet. Winds are still fairly light inside of Prince William Sound and outside as well, and northeasterlies again as you get closer to the Kenai Peninsula. That's for Thursday. Seas running around 3 to 5 feet in the north and western Gulf. For the Alaska Peninsula and inside Bristol Bay we go. A southeasterly flow develops inside of Bristol Bay tomorrow, 25 knots with a 3-foot sea, 3 to as high as 7-foot seas on the Pacific coastline and 8-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast with 30-knot winds from the south and east. That's all in response to low pressure working north and east into the Bering. 25 knots inside of Bristol Bay on Thursday. Winds come up to 40 knots for the Bering Sea coast, 9-foot seas there, and 7 to as high as 15-foot seas across the North Pacific there, 20 to 35 knot winds as we get into Thursday. Now, take a look at the Aleutians. Storm force winds are expected across the marine areas for the Central Islands tomorrow. 50 to 55 knots sustained, 17 to 21-foot seas there for the Bering Sea coast and 21 to 23-foot seas for the Pacific coast. Looking at southeasterlies from Nikolsky to Unalaska at 40 to 45 knots with 13 to 14-foot seas. And notice by the end of the day we get back into northerly winds across the western chain, 40 knots with a 15-foot sea. Watch what happens to these higher winds. They spread eastward as we get into Thursday there from Nikolsky to Unalaska. Those stronger winds, 45 knots, 14 to as high as 21-foot seas there on the Pacific side from Unalaska to Nikolsky. Winds diminish for the central and western chain and become westerly with time as we head into Thursday. For the west coast, how far north do those stronger winds spread? Well, not that far. St. Paul and St. George are looking at 40-knot winds with 16-foot seas on Wednesday. Those 40-knot winds also spread northward to St. Matthew. Otherwise, 30 to 35 up the western coast with seas as high as 11 to 14 feet. And a little bit further out towards St. Matthew and the Pribilofs, 16-foot seas there on Wednesday. The winds do spread even further north as you get into Thursday for St. Lawrence Island, north of Nunivak Island, winds as high as 40 knots, 45 knots for St. Paul and St. George with seas upwards of 20 feet for Thursday. So again, conditions will be worsening as we get toward the end of the week for you. Westerlies are generally light for the Beaufort Seacoast with small seas, 2 to 4-foot seas there for the Beaufort, and offshore flow from Barrow southward toward Kotzebue Sound, 2 to 3-foot seas on a 10 to 15-knot wind from the east. Thursday, a light southerly flow develops off of Barrow, light southeasterlies with very small seas there for the Beaufort Seacoast, and the easterlies pick up, so winds moving from east to west off the Chukchi Seacoast, 15 to as high as 25 knots with a 6-foot sea on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, high pressure is in control of the interior and by and large southeast Alaska as well. A few showers there in the misty fjords, a few light areas of snow and maybe some fog for the Beaufort Seacoast, but the action is out in the Bering with not just one, not just two, but 3 waves of low pressure working through. One of them starts to fall apart. The next one lines up for the western Aleutians at 971 millibars. And by Thursday, the third is moving into the western Pacific, 954, and there's more to come. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.